Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. That laugh was, didn't know if I would be able to pull together the energy to put into this. I don't know why. It's feeling weird this week. I don't know. Let me just check the news. You know, I really wasn't paying attention to the news. Let me just see what's been going on. Let's hear fascism here in America. Let's hear the Grover Norquist's fantasies coming true. What else happened? That weird billionaire that's trying to live forever. He monitors his son's erections at night. All right. I guess that's all that stuff, I guess, just ambiently sapped my energy. Now that I know about it, now it feels worse. Well, you know what's gonna make me and you, dear listener, feel better? Why, today's episode. And who is my guest? It is Seth Gordon. If you don't know who Seth is, I'm gonna read you his bio right now. Originally on the path to be an architect, director, and producer, Seth Gordon's life took a detour into documentary filmmaking when he picked up a camera while teaching abroad in Kenya. After working in different positions in filming and editing, he eventually made his acclaimed doc, The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, about rivals in the world of competitive Donkey Kong playing. From there, Seth became a comedy director, directing some of the best sitcoms of the 21st century, including Parks and Rec, Community, The Office, The Goldbergs, and more, as well as films such as Four Christmases, Horrible Bosses, Baywatch, and his most recent film, which just debuted on Netflix last week, Back in Action, starring Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz. Folks, this is the film Jamie Foxx had a stroke on. Can you believe it? So that's great. This is a great talk. I really enjoyed talking to him. This is my first time meeting him. Loved King of Kong. He's the man behind the camera. Some great comedy things this century. Jesus Christ. Do we need comedies right now? Are we going to do it? You know, he was originally going to be an architect, so obviously I talk about that with him. And then the path from there to being a director. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this. That's a cool guy. All right, before we get to the show, though, coming up, hey, next week, I think if I'm doing the math right, next week is the 15th anniversary of Beginnings, and I'm doing a special episode that should be very fun, so look forward to that. Also, coming up on the show, I've been just putting my head down and doing interviews, because the outside world is... I believe despair is the dominant emotion crushing my skeleton right now. But coming up, I got some great interviews with comic book people. Jamie McKelvey, wonderful artist. Daniel Warren Johnson, great artist too, writer as well. Is Jamie right? I'm not sure. Josh Satumer, who show ran one of the best shows last year, Say Nothing. Jack Pendarvis, that was such a great talk. He's a brilliant writer. I love his book. Awesome. And he also wrote on Adventure Time and some other stuff. So stay tuned for those, especially the 50th anniversary. But for now, let's talk to Seth. Because I read your Wikipedia article.
Okay. I didn't write it. I'm not sure what's there. I hope it's okay.
Well, we'll find out. I wrote down some biographical bits of information about you. And I'm kind of you did go to Yale, and here's the thing. This is I want to return to this later, but I'll just set it up now. I was a philosophy professor before I came to do this TV writing and podcasting and comedy and stuff. And you were an architect, or you studied architecture.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm curious. I want to return to that, but I was thinking about Yale. You know, I have a lot of friends that have gone to Ivy League schools, and I'm kind of curious about the mentality you went in there with and the mentality you left with. And what I mean by that is, you know, in elite institutions, you are kind of given the elite point of view. And I'm curious if that was something that resonated with you or whether you resisted it.
For me, it grossed me out.
Uh-huh.
Like the general, what I guess would now be termed sort of intense privilege, was for me a little weird. I think I was interested as kind of a nerd in going to a challenging school and, came into it that way. And my dad also, just knew and liked Yale. He's a professor. So is my mom. And so there was I don't know, they were supportive of applying there and stuff, but I think I discovered it so much of it's like half the student body, what was driving them was so foreign to me in terms of, wanting often to be lawyers or investment bankers or portfolio managers or I don't know. And like to get that important internship for your summer and like have a life plan. Like none of that tracked for me. And I found it pretty alienating, except for a small group of friends that I'm very tight with still. Like I think that it was in those specific ways, just not really for me. And, so much so that I took some time away from school, living as a teacher in Kenya, which is, I guess, sort of as far away from that as I could get. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. And in a way, a good antidote to the elite college experience.
Can I ask what was the process of where you're like, does it start out as kind of like, oh, this doesn't feel great, I feel kind of alienated, and then grow worse? Do you get that feeling at some, like, by the time you're a junior, like where in your schooling does that start to sneak in?
Pretty early. Like I certainly knew in my sophomore year that I was going to need a break from it and was searching for what was the right way to get some space from that. Like I never had any intention to drop out, but I definitely wanted to just pump the brakes and get some perspective and not get too drawn into the competitive mindset. And I don't know. And so that, but I took the time as a teacher in Kenya, sort of halfway through the college experience. And that was much needed at that point. And I think that gave me the sort of perspective and distance to get some clarity on what the hell I was doing. And come back in with a little clearer intention and a clearer sort of set of goals, get my head on straight for myself. So I'm not just swept up in, I don't know what, being driven towards law school or something just because other people are doing it.
Uh-huh. Did you know the cachet of the school? I only learned this in adulthood, where I had a choice. I was either going to go to Penn or I went to Pitt. And my dad was like, if you go to Penn, it's going to cost a lot of money. So you better really want to work. And I was like, I kind of like, I can skate by. Like I can get A's by like doing a little bit of work. And then I can have, I was in a band in college and worked at the radio station, all that. And, I wanted to hang out. So I made the choice. I made the right choice going to Pitt. But in adulthood and coming to do this for a living, I was like, maybe I should have gone to Penn. Maybe that would have like worked out better in terms of like networking and stuff like that. Did you have any inkling that was something that could come out of that experience?
Not really. I wasn't strategic like that, or right. I don't know. I mean, what really happened for me is by being a teacher in Kenya, I think that was eye-opening in a number of ways, including like just seeing such a different view of the world. Living in a place was like no running water, no electricity, really, off the path, in a way. But what I did have access to for the first time was a video camera. My dad loaned me his, and I had kept that like hidden in my hut where I was staying for a couple months because I felt like it was too extreme of an object to whip out when I just got there, right? And I basically discovered documentary film by having that camera. And once I did start filming and was trying to capture the stories I was seeing, I think that really, I found a lot of clarity and purpose through that. Like where, if anything I had done in college was, just going with the flow and figuring things out. This was more like, oh, I've discovered something I really love and respond to and connect with. And I don't think I even thought about distinctions in genres of film at that time. Like I don't know if I even seen a documentary at that point or thought about it. But I knew I loved filming, and I knew I loved trying to tell a story. And I don't know, it was a powerful turning point accidentally.
Okay. Well, then let's go backwards from there, because did you have any inkling that was something that resonated with you? Filmmaking in general, let's just say, resonated with you, or felt good, or felt right, or was something that was existentially fulfilling prior to that?
No, because I had no access to that. It never dawned on me as a thing one could want to do. I enjoyed movies, obviously, but that felt so far away. The ability to make it yourself and the ability to edit. I mean, everything changed around that time where, that was before Final Cut Pro had come out, and it came out just after that. And then all of a sudden there was a way in combination with the camera that you could tell full stories. And I sort of fumbled through teaching myself how to edit. It was actually on a early competitor to Avid called Media 100. There was like this, they were more like TV news oriented as a program, but that's what Yale had access to. They just had one in the computer lab. No one was using it. No one knew how to use it, but there was a manual, and I just kind of fumbled through and learned enough how to edit that I was able to cut that story together of what I'd witnessed in Kenya. And that just made sense, like a fish to water or something. Like it just clicked for me. And I didn't go to film school myself. I couldn't afford it, didn't really have the access. And so I just started working as an editor shooter with like a little bit of leaning towards motion graphics and the editing side, because that was a more employable skill early on.
This is a weird question. I don't know if it's answerable, but I'll ask it anyway and see where it leads. Do you find that like through this process, it changed how you visually thought about things? Because when you were talking, and I was reminiscing about, like, I remember getting a password broken version of Final Cut off of like a torrent when I was in grad school, I think it was. And you could tell that I was definitely more interested in writing Family Guy spec scripts than I was in working on my dissertation. So if that gives you a clue of what I was really dedicating my time to then.
Yeah.
But I remember, like, it really changed the way, because the way that I visually started thinking about stuff was like, oh, if I film something from this angle, what do I need the person to do? And again, I'm like saying it in words now, but it's really just like, changed the way that my brain thought visually. What do I need? How do I need them to move in this other angle so that the shots match up?
Yeah.
Because I didn't go to film school either. I was on the path to write in journals for the consumption of 12 people, or how many read philosophical journals. And it really did change my brain. When you started doing that, did it like, again, like I said, I don't know if that's answerable, but like, have you thought about it?
Yeah, I think honestly so I knew I was interested in architecture, and I pursued that as a degree because that's really, my school was really strong in architecture. That was just a good program.
Yeah.
And that unintentionally, like the discipline of architecture, meaning like understanding section, plan, isometrics, like all that, really connects to filmmaking if you learn the discipline properly. Like, it gives you an ability to parse and dissect ideas, space, all sorts of things that really helps with filmmaking, especially as a director and an editor. And because it's like thinking about space, imagining that space, turning around in your mind, thinking about what the coverage is, where's the light? How will the light change during the scene? How will you portray the change of time? Like all that stuff, it connects to things you have to think about before you build a building and get your permits and get your all that. Like you think about the procession or the progression through your building. What is the narrative of that journey that you want people to experience? And like the buildings that you're studying, sort of the great ones in a way, all have something like that to learn from, whether it's like the Alhambra or the Pantheon or whatever. Like there's a story that the thing tells and the experience it puts you through as a visitor to that place. And I felt, that's a whole lot like thinking about a sequence in a film.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. So prior to studying architecture, because as a parenthetical, when you were saying that, it really made me think of evolutionary theory. You know, in evolutionary theory, there's an organism has some kind of adaptation, and then the environment changes, and it happens to be if that adaptation works well in the new environment, then the animal,
you mean like natural selection?
Yeah, right. It thrives, right? And it's just like, oh, it's really exciting to hear you had this kind of visual language that you built by learning architecture that then in this new environment just helps you thrive. Like you're already thinking visually as you kind of enter this, even though you didn't go to film school.
Right. And I think that it probably affected also what I was seeing when I watched movies as I started to learn that discipline and those skills. But it wasn't a conscious process. It was just, I think you naturally are thinking about how did they do that? How did they pull that off? But wait a minute, like that would have been complicated to make happen. So they had to do it a bunch of times. Okay. So they had to do it a bunch of times. So that, where were the cameras probably then? You know, just all that stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't even have a concept of how a crew was assembled or what the constituent members were at that time or departments or anything. I didn't know any of that stuff. I just was, thinking about what, spaces and sequences and, making an impact. And there was this, during the architecture studies, there was this one place I got obsessed with called Hadrian's Villa, which is outside of Rome. I rode for a grant to do stuff there. And point is, it was this person's house who was an emperor who had ruled the Roman Empire for 20 years. And he saw more of the world than probably any other person at that time because he worked with Trajan, who was his predecessor as an emperor, who was also his cousin. And he was like the tactician and Trajan was the leader of the army. And so he saw so much of the world. And then for his house, which was a house of his house was the size of the town of Pompeii. That's just like the ridiculous resources of the emperor, but he rebuilt the Roman Empire as his house. And all the amazing things he saw on the fringes of the empire, he took those ideas and rebuilt. He's also the emperor that did build the Pantheon, which still stands, right? So it's sort of an extraordinary mind, and all of that villa has a story too. And like decoding that was super interesting as a process, understanding what story was being told about uniting the empire, among other things.
Yeah. Wait, when you say geographically resembled the empire, do you mean literally like this part over here is like Britannia and this part over here? Or do you mean just like it took themes from all the different parts and kind of combined them into one?
It was more like remarkable structures that exist in certain places in the empire. He borrowed those ideas and made hybrids.
Gotcha.
And the order they were built in and the sequence of events is a story that's being told. And realizing that and starting to pick that apart became fascinating for me. It was what my thesis was about. And I think that informed film too. You know, it was sort of a deeper dive into a story that a building can tell. And it was related to the art of memory and the rhetorical skill of using space, loci and imagines, right? Using an imagined space as a mnemonic device.
Yeah. Because
in Roman court, you weren't allowed notes or paperwork. You had to memorize huge tracts of information. And this whole system was like an invented architecture, an imagined building or series of buildings is where you stored the text. And you move through that imaginary place. And so essentially the connection between rhetoric and architecture was there deeply. And that was super interesting to me. And I think that informed the approach because it's sort of reversing the process for movies. You start with the script and then you find the spaces to inhabit once you've got the opportunity to make it.
Okay. Yes. So could you think visually prior to going into architecture? Like, was architecture something you went into because you were already thinking, you already conceive of things visually? Or
I think so. I think it's because it's a very multidisciplinary kind of study, right? The engineering really matters. So does the artistic hand. And when you're in the field of architecture, people specialize and they become focused on the one. But as a student, you're kind of a generalist learning all of that. And I think that was really also relevant to film, like knowing basically art and science come together if you're going to make a building and you expect it to stand.
Right.
And that evolved radically over, the last 2,000 years, and knowing the history of art and architecture, inevitably you learn the history generally, they're very connected. And so I think that's why architecture is just endlessly interesting and fascinating, because it's not just about drawing. It's about experience,
Yeah.
Silence.
I'm asking this because I'm thinking back. I taught this philosophy of art class, and one of the books I taught, I remember, was like kind of a dialectic of forms. And it was basically kind of talking about how art as a visual language transforms by being responses to each other and, over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a kind of Hegelian way. And I didn't get it then because I was not thinking visually. And it really was only until I picked up a camera and started like shooting stuff where I then really started I'm like, oh, I get it. And so I had to go through this kind of transformation. And I'm kind of curious, when you were a kid or when you were a teenager, how did you conceive of things? I know that's probably a difficult question, but did you think visually? Like, did you actually did things come to you in images, or did you think about they come in words or just non-specific mentalese, I suppose? Is that
I think it was
question?
Highly visual, like very kinesthetic, very visual. I wasn't a very good reader. My eyes are kind of screwed up. So I've got one very nearsighted eye, one farsighted eye, and stigmatism. And I think that didn't, it just meant I see things a little weirdly. and I get really interested in how to capture stuff seen from an unusual or a different perspective. Like macro lenses, for example, are extremely compelling to me, like getting inside another world, that you might otherwise miss, I think is like what I got super interested in once I did have access to a camera.
When you were younger, was this something that you were like, I'm okay with, or did you feel bad? Like, oh, I can't see, like, quote unquote, other people?
No, I could get by. I wasn't like, I don't want to portray it as like, I don't know, a disability of some kind. It was just I just know that I see a little weirdly. Like I had no central vision in my left eye. It affected playing sports. It affected all sorts of things. But I think, I mean, you were asking in what way did I think? I think that really influenced how I think, not to be able, I was very aware of having that sort of abnormality. Also was a lefty. You get like, there's certain ways you don't fit in and things that are not made for you. And that, yeah, it was a constant reminder. I think the other thing that really was impactful for me, though I didn't realize at the time, is my parents as professors had saved up their sabbaticals or like their years where they could teach at other institutions. My sister didn't particularly like leaving. So we stayed in Chicago until she was in college. She's 10 years older than me. And so when she went to college, they had all these sabbatical years saved up. And so we started moving. We went to New York and then London, back to Chicago, moved to Seattle. And so many, opportunities to restart in a way. That's one way to put it. Another way to put it is like, I always had to start over, make new friends, always the new kid. It's almost like what military families probably go through to a certain extent. You have to be really good at making fast friends and you have to be ready for, it's all those people just go away when you move, especially era before cell phones and everything. So I think that was unintentionally very beneficial for the movie business, right? I was really prepared for, you have these deep relationships that are very focused and very intense, and then everybody goes their separate ways. That's what these projects are. And I think that can be hard on people. But I grew up a little more used to that.
Yeah. You think you're going to be friends with these people forever, and then maybe you see them on a red carpet like 10 years later.
Yeah. That you have to have a certain mindset to be able to just turn the page and not certainly no hard feelings, but just no, I don't know. Not a bunch of attachment. That certainly not a bunch of a negative attachment.
It's so funny because I'll do one of these interviews and I'll be like, "Oh, now we're best friends," and my brain's like, "No, you're not. You might see this person at like a WGA thing sometime in the future, or something like that." But like, no. But like, are you in general like that? Not just like in terms of say like artistic projects. Are you in general someone who doesn't get attached easily to people?
I think it's been a long process of learning how to manage that, manage that disappointment when people are comfortable letting go. It's obviously all completely changed now with the phones, right? It's so easy to stay in touch in a way it wasn't before. So, that helps a ton. But I feel like you were asking about like the formation of a creative approach. And I think that what happened early on to me moving constantly was informative. Yeah. Like it had an effect.
Like if you're comfortable talking about it, like with your wife, did it take you a while to be okay? Do you know what I mean? Where you're just like, yeah.
Well, yeah. Interesting thing there. We started long distance, really. I met her, but we didn't live in the same town. And I think that in a way helped. It was a slow progression towards that like trust and commitment. And, I'm glad it probably wouldn't have happened any other way. Right? Like and she's similar. She's an artist. She very focused on projects and, I could imagine there would be people who couldn't handle that, to have someone who cared as much about work as anything else, but both of us have that predisposition, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then let's go back a little more. Did your parents have any wants or desires for you for a job, for a career, for a life? Did they have something that they expected of you or thought you should do?
They did a lot of wondering aloud about what it would be, and sort of suggestion of professor or pastor. I was like, what?
Wait, sorry, what?
I don't know why. We weren't an especially religious family growing up, but my mom had been in her childhood. And I think because I was comfortable with public speaking, I think thought like that might be where I would tend towards, but yeah, that wasn't my jam, certainly. And then I think they were actually really good about not, putting a ton of pressure to be a certain thing or be a certain way. And I think they were puzzled actually, what in the world, like when they would start to visit me on sets, they were like, where the hell did you learn all this? Like what? Like it's sort of the opposite of some sort of Nepo baby. Like I'm coming into this with no access, no knowledge, no, I don't know, hookups, if you will. And that's actually true even from like going to the fancy schools or whatever. None of those fancy schools matter at all in film. They just don't care, right? It's just the truth of the way the film business works. There's certainly Nepo babies in film, but like having gone to a nice school, that maybe matters more on the East Coast. It doesn't matter out in LA, that's for sure. So I don't know if that answers that question. Yeah,
we're getting there because I want to know, did their wondering aloud carry any weight for you? Was it something that even if you're like, well, I'm not going to be a pastor, it still nagged at you at all?
I think it was more like created anxiety in me to try to excel and to achieve sort of regardless of what thing I chose to participate in. And I think that I learned a lot in these like sort of last 15 years about unpacking what that pressure did to me and like trying to be the good student and trying to live up to their, expectations for me. And it sounds like you had a version of that too. You get good grades. If you get, like, I felt like my job was you get good grades and everything's going to be okay, and that's it's a bit stupid on some level. Like what does school matter? What do grades matter? But that's definitely how I was brought up. It makes sense with two professor parents. It's like that so much importance would be put on that.
Okay. Do you ever get out from under that? Because I'm still like, I hand in the script and I'm like, can I get pats on the head from the executive that's reading this? Can I get, where's my stickers? Where's my A+?
Well, I think it's going to be a lifelong process to learn how to manage that, at least for me. Cause like learning how to basically not even look towards anything external for a sense of approval or doing a good job or whatever. And I think part of why film was such an attractive discipline, at least how it used to be, is there was an objective measure of how you did, whether you believe in it or not. A box office is a quantifiable way to understand if you did a good job. Obviously, that is totally depends on the genre of film you're making and everything. But that is really how a lot of folks in Hollywood anyway assess something's success, was just its box office performance and then how that would relate to later windows of release. And so I think that, wanting to be an A student in life is like, but it's totally different now. And this is going to be really interesting for this movie coming out because there is no box office. And as we well know, Netflix is not super public about its data, right? And so some stuff is shared with you, but not all. And so you're really left in the dark about the details of its performance because it can't be reduced to a single number.
Yeah.
Right. And that's probably a good thing, but it's a new thing to get used to for me.
Yeah. But it's a new number. You still want that. You still want those, whatever the viewing, millions of viewing.
Yeah.
Is there the same thing for the DGA as we just won in the strike, the WGA? They now have to share like the top things with us. I don't know the actual. Once we got out of the strike, I'm like, what did we actually win? And
that's how I feel about it. I feel like mild progress was made.
Yeah,
but I don't think
for sure.
Yeah, but I don't think it's true transparency yet for anybody. I actually think it's funny, like these side industries that have popped up of companies that look at third party signals to assess how it probably did, or like proxies. So you're looking at how Samsung TV behavior, because Netflix is in those, and you can get data on how people are using Samsung TVs. That a lot of people have Samsung TVs, and so people were using that to estimate what the numbers really were. And then obviously Netflix has been more public recently with their numbers, and I think that's good. I think we're all hungry. Just tell us how it's doing.
Yeah,
just want to have some sense of my bearings.
That's crazy. That's the kind of like scientific, I don't even know what noun I want to use here, scientific work that had to be done. Like once they stopped tracking COVID numbers, then people started looking at the number of positives that Walgreens was saying. So you would go to the Walgreens site to see when they were doing COVID testing to see there, or now you can go to like the LA watershed or whatever it is, the number of like particles that they find in the water. And then you can kind of like have a general understanding of how you should conduct yourself in public. But that's the same kind of thing with these numbers.
Totally. We're dying to be able to, just orient ourselves and know what the context is, know where we are, and we'll take whatever we can get to get that sense. But yeah, it's interesting.
But your self-worth, at least mine is somehow wrapped up in all of this stuff. My self-worth is wrapped up in whether an executive likes the script or not, or whether your self-worth is wrapped up in how much money it makes, and not in a gross capitalistic way, but in a enough people liked this movie.
Yeah. It's simple. Like, did I do a good job? And that's an indicator of something, at least what the box office was,
Are you trying to, parenthetical, because I am trying to divorce myself from that, and it's not easy, and I'm not doing a good job, but I'm trying to, if I like the thing I made, or I like the thing I wrote, then I'm just happy about it. I'm trying to get there. It's not that I am far, far away from that. Is that a goal of yours, or are you happy where you are?
I mean, I'm definitely, I think age has helped a little bit too. Like not be too concerned about that. And that's obviously mixed right in with the changes in the business. So it's hard to tease those apart, but, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. You just gotta self-soothe.
Okay. I want to go back and fill in some of these gaps. So you're born in Evanston, right?
Yep. Evanston, Illinois.
Do you go to school there, or because you said Chicago? Was that just a general, like if someone's they just say New York?
Basically, yeah. I grew up in Evanston, which is the first suburb north of Chicago, and where Northwestern University is, and that's where my folks taught. So I was there for the first basically 12 years.
Because there's a really nice art school, like a bunch of people I know, like Lauren Lapkus and a lot of other comedy people that I know are from Evanston and went to like the art school there. Was that even before, like, I guess up to junior high? Was that of any interest?
Well, I'm not sure which art school you mean. Was it one of the middle
there? I think the school there was just like very good in the arts.
Yeah, there was definitely really good public schools in Evanston, and that mattered a lot. And I think the other thing it mattered a lot, there was this after school program called the Piven Workshop, which is, it's Jeremy Piven's parents, and it's like the Cusacks all taught there.
Wow.
And so I think that was a really good thing to have done as a little kid, just like learning to play in drama and theater, and learning playing parts. And I don't know, it was a great experience and training, to have gotten, even though it was as much as anything an after school program.
But did it get in your head at all? Was ever like a thought like, oh, this might be fun to do?
Definitely. That it was definitely enjoyable enough that I ended up doing some theater as a kid and more of that in Seattle too. And I think ultimately that's helped me be able to have conversations with actors and know what it's like to be in the vulnerable position of being the performer. And when you don't have somebody paying attention, telling you if you're doing what they want, it's very scary. And so I think having some exposure to what that's like, I think has affected how I behave as a director and, communicate with actors and try very hard to, remind them that they're seen.
Was that ever something you actively pursued though? Or was it just like, this is nice? And then I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what were your early dreams? When did architecture come into the picture as this is the thing?
My good friend's dad was an architect when we lived in Evanston. And I just thought what he did was super cool. Like what I would see of his work, his house. He told me it was the worst profession ever. Don't you dare become an architect. But I still thought like what I saw of the work he did was really amazing. Like to get to draw for a job. It was obviously I was young. I didn't understand. But the other thing that happened there was that he had a video camera they didn't use. And that was, I remember an early experience where it was one of those ones where it was all in one but VHS, like those big ones with the thing off the side. And we, not really knowing what we were doing, we used that camera and we made this video as if the camera was the family cat because they had a couple cats and like it chased underneath the couch and then and I think that creative process was probably formative in some ways, even though that was a brief thing, just getting to play with that piece of equipment and have it not be super serious or super high stakes or anything was probably a really, I don't know. I remember it and I was probably 7 or 8. So it stuck.
Yeah. You were Sam Raimi-ing it. You were like,
I guess, I don't know.
But yeah, no, totally. Because then at the very least, you have this precursor of this visual language of seeing how the world might be through this lens that's separate from your own visual apparatus.
Yeah. Yeah. And where you could emphasize things because it could zoom that camera.
Yeah.
And so that was big to get to understand. That's such a crazy concept when you're little. It probably is nothing to kids now. The phone does everything. But at that time, that was amazing to have access to. Yeah. Even just for that one day.
What did your parents teach?
They were, it was like news media and public policy, race and public policy. My dad taught a course for a while called corruption, which was basically studying how corruption operates in different places around the world. Because it really is cultural, like something that one place might see as corrupt, another place that's just the way things are done. So it's not bad. And so just like wrapping your head around the cultural context, that was, yes, I was really exposed to, I'd say, a lot of ideas around the dinner table growing up that were really helpful, informative. Good conversation.
Did that teach you how to live in 21st century America?
I think it definitely taught me don't trust the news. Like my mom did a thing on the way America's distrust in government has evolved over the last 50 years. So like helping her with that project gave me some awareness of, I feel like what has fallen all around us in the last 10 years or so. She was just writing about it a little earlier than that.
Do you think that, as a parenthetical, I always look for certain things that kind of push people to the side of whatever. I think, and there's nothing wrong with this. I always want to just footnote. But like, I think a lot of people are just given a script at birth and they're kind of like, yeah, this makes sense. And then they just do it. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I look for the things that kind of push people to the side that are just like, wait, the narrative I'm being told to follow doesn't make a ton of sense. And then you kind of pick your own path out of that. Do you think that was an early, like, finding out that maybe corporate media, I had to wait to read Manufacturing Consent in college. And then I'm like, oh, okay, now this all makes sense. Mm. Do you think those early experiences, like helping your mom, kind of like pushed you to the side? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think like their general demeanor of questioning everything certainly affected me. And, I didn't accept things just because an authority figure said them. I think that ends up being really helpful even in the creative work too. You'd like think for yourself, think differently. Don't just do what you're told. Or if they're telling you to do something, be open to, what would the absolute worst thing be that you could say right now? You don't say it, but think about it. Like that's that kind of, being willingness to be bad or playful, I think was encouraged.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. How do you square then getting a note, knowing you want the approval of someone? You get a note and it's probably terrible. There's a good chance that it's like not the best note for something.
You're talking about an executive note now?
Yes, I am talking about an executive. How do you, because I want the approval and then I look at it and I'm just like, half the time I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. It's not good. It's like, it doesn't come from a good place. Like sometimes there's a bad note that comes from a good place and I sit down for a couple hours or I go do something else and I come back and I'm like, I know how to deal with this. But sometimes they're just not good.
I usually get automatically angry at notes. That's just my first. But then I make sure to take a walk or like take a breather.
Yeah.
And then for those ones that are bafflingly ill-conceived or don't, I figure like, it's possible that the assistant was asked to write the notes or like there may be an explanation, that's reasonable. That doesn't mean people are an idiot. It just was the result of some dysfunctional process. And having been on the other side of it a little bit where you're maybe part of the producing team and the other person is the writer on this one, I've witnessed how crazy the notes generating process can be where someone has basically there are two different thoughts that are at some level inherently contradictory. Yep. And nobody wants to have the confrontational conversation on that side of things to iron out whose note wins. So they just give the writer both notes and make the writer deal with it. You just got to reconcile it. And it's maddening because if you're a writer just trying to do a good job in the way we were talking about, like, that's about the worst thing you can do to them because it's crazy making and it's, and it demonstrates that somebody at some level is not recognizing on that side that what they're asking for is either impossible or so destructive to the script that it shouldn't even be attempted or discussed. So, I try to give this is the old age thing, like tried to have a little grace over time and realize that. But the flip side is when the notes are thoughtful and they are good, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
Right. When somebody is paying attention and they are just trying to make your thing better and it's not coming from an ego place like that does exist too. I have to just say out loud.
yeah, for sure. Because there's also this like, oh, you get it, and there's that kind of like resonance that actually feel. And now this is a few and far between kind of feelings in this business.
Yeah,
at least in my experience. But
I think the other thing that was very helpful for me starting in documentaries as I did, documentary is an inherently writerly job. It just is. And that's true for the editor. And often the director is the editor because you're the one, no one can afford to get paid. Right. And so you end up wearing a bunch of the hats. And so, but it's such a writerly discipline making documentaries because you're discovering the story as you're shooting it and you're shaping it as you're shooting it. And you have to figure out when to stop, which is honestly a bigger decision than it's such a simple sentence, but it's a complicated decision about when to stop. And, I think that gives me a different attitude about writing than I might have had without the documentary experience, cause I don't know, you have to be sort of, you're dealing with something that will not budge, which is reality. It just happened or it didn't happen and you were there to capture it or you weren't. But still there's a lot of ways to tell a given story with those materials, depending on what you captured. And I think that was, I don't know. It's so now I'm in the process of writing stuff, narrative stuff. And I think having gone through it in that way on the fiction side, on the nonfiction side, it prepared me in a way for that approach. And I'm sure I'd do it differently if I hadn't been through the ringer on all these documentaries.
When you are making a documentary, and maybe this is just something you learned over time, but like, is it just a feeling when you've gotten to the end when you're like, okay, I know how the story that I had in my head, I know how it works now. Was there just a feeling, or which I have to assume is that like reality doesn't line up with the thing you thought it was going to be. And now you're just like, okay, well, this is what makes sense. Like, was it something that you had to develop over time, or do you think you had kind of like a knack for it already?
I think that endless questioning of everything in the conversations at home growing up prepared me for the uncertainty that's inherent in the doc business. And frankly, the uncertainty that's in the narrative business, but in a totally different way. And so I found, at least in making documentaries, you have to conceive to a certain degree what you think it's going to be like, because you have to make plans enough to go to certain places and shoot certain things in hopes that this over here is going to be the story. But I've never done one where that was the story. Ultimately, it turns it into something else, and it's doing that constantly. And so you have to have a really strong stomach to not get sick over the lost effort and the missteps, which were, it wasn't because you were yourself lost. It was because that seemed like the most reasonable thing, but then it turned out to not be the way it went at all. And if you can just acknowledge what it is now, that's critical, to be able to be that honest with yourself and say, that's not it anymore. But let's see what's cool about what this is now is X, Y, and Z.
Okay. I got 2 questions left. One directly related to this. Is there an example that you're comfortable sharing where you went in with one idea and it totally transformed and you had to roll with it?
Yes. Okay. One from King of Kong, which is a documentary about guys that are the best in the world at Donkey Kong, as crazy as a thing as that is.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, in that case, we were making a movie initially about competitive rivalries on arcade games. So there was a Miss Pac-Man rivalry, a Donkey Kong rivalry, blah, blah, blah. And what ended up being way more interesting were the 2 guys connected to Donkey Kong. So we had to let all the other stuff go away. And that was that was flights and effort and trips and shooting and whatever. And it was just like, but that's all not interesting compared to this one. So that is an example of that. And then even within that, we had anticipated again and again, that one of the great competitors was going to show up for a showdown with the other great competitor, and he never did. And so it felt like, fuck, did we misstep? Because by assuming, because we need that for the movie, they have to have a showdown. And then it was my then girlfriend, now wife, that said, no, dude, that's the point. The point is he won't show up to play. And then I was like, you're just saying that. Trying to make me feel better. No, she was just completely right and could see it before I could. And so I think that's another way of answering your earlier question. Having trusted advisors, basically, in your life who can give you a reality check and you actually listen is, I think, such a big deal. Yeah. Such a big deal. And then from this current one I'm doing is about the ruby slippers. The ruby slippers that got stolen from the Judy Garland Museum in Grand Rapids, Minnesota in 2005. I had filmed an interview with the owner of the slippers who was the victim of that crime, devastated after that theft. But for 13 years, there was no other movement in the case, that they were just presumed missing or lost. And then there was an FBI sting out of nowhere, and the slippers were recovered. And then later there were guys that confessed to the crime that's actually happening now. And it turns out the slippers were not only in their possession, they were buried underground trying to evade the statute of limitations. And they were used in a sex tape or two, we think. FOIA request upcoming.
What?
And in other words, the truth of what really happened is so much crazier than we could have guessed, you know, definitely the stranger than fiction paradigm.
Okay. Last question that I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I want to go back to something I kind of left in the beginning. How did your goals evolve, and how were you okay with that evolution? Right. You said you were kind of, walk me through this, right? Architecture was the thing. You become kind of disillusioned while in college still. And then you go.
Yeah, I would say disillusioned with like the ivory tower, I guess you'd say, and with the general sort of mentality that, you know, your degree matters and you're like, none of that matters. And that was very apparent to me. And that a lot of the people I was in school with, bless them all, were very committed to this narrative that you're going to get a piece of paper that's going to mean something. And I could see that was not true. They didn't mean shit. And so I don't know if it's disillusion. I just knew that wasn't it. And that wasn't going to be my thing. And I had to find my thing. And I think it was big to discover something that came so naturally to me, which was the using the camera to tell a story, even in a sort of documentary setting. But it totally continued to evolve because I stumbled into, you know, hand to mouth work as a shooter editor. And then I'm there in London in 2003 when the Dixie Chicks, I was filming when one of them talked bad about the president, and then saw that, and that turned into a film, a wonderful documentary. So I saw the inside of that process, and that led to another documentary about a band, which led then to King of Kong. I think it's like being willing to be open to and endlessly curious about a bunch of stuff has helped me. And I think the general, like, I don't know, like if this, whatever I'm focused on right now isn't sort of materializing into something interesting, don't force it. Let it go and move over here where something else is interesting and brewing. I think that has been very helpful for me to never put all the eggs in one basket and, pursue lots of things, not out of a desperation for anything to go a certain way, but just like the natural curiosity and chasing it and following it, you know?
Yeah. No, I get that. Was it emotionally difficult when you had that kind of revelation that like credentialization doesn't mean much? or was it just like, okay, now I'm just pivoting?
I think it was more of the latter. It was a little bit like Holden Caulfield for a while, like you're all phonies. But then I realized it's not their fault. Like in their world, in their reality, the paper does matter. But in my reality and what I value, it just doesn't particularly matter. It doesn't mean much of anything other than you had the good fortune in one way or another or the privilege to go to put yourself in a place where you could attend such an institution. But nothing beyond that is guaranteed in any way, shape or form.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me.
Of course.
Such a joy
I could
to
do
talk
it
to you.
for hours and hours. It was awesome.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bio, 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 bio.